Welcome everyone to our second Fashion Means Business Fashion talk of this academic year. This is the first in our collaboration with the Research Hub. So today it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Dr. Francesca Bonetti, who is a lecturer in marketing at London College of Fashion, University of Arts, London. She also acts as a visiting lecturer to universities across the world, and her work has taken her to Europe, America, and Asia. So her particular focus has been on business technological innovation across cultures in the fashion and creative industry. Very topical at the moment if we think about how COVID-19 and the pandemic has accelerated the adoptions of technology. This was a research that Francesca actually began before the pandemic outbreak. She's published many different articles that are featured in Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services and also the International Journal of Technology Marketing, and has also contributed to a number of different scholarly work and books. She has extensive international industry experience as a business innovator and marketing communication strategist in the fashion and clothing sector. And she currently consults for established and emerging brands on digital strategy and transformation. Thank you very much, Francesca, for coming today and for sharing your insights and research into managerial approaches to consumer-facing in-store technology adoption decisions in fashion retail. So I'm going to hand over to you. Slightly different to our usual format. We are going to be taking questions throughout the talk. So please do put your questions into the chat. And if it's okay with you, Francesca, I will flag up any questions that we have during your presentation so you're able to answer. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Francesca.
Perfect. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this session. Thank you for attending. I believe Hannah has already given enough of background on myself, so I'll go straight into this research. As Anna was mentioning, this is a project, a big project that I've been conducting from my PhD years. So it's been over 5 years work that I've been conducting on this project. And the title is again Managerial Approaches. So how managers deal with anything which is consumer-facing technology. So anything that the consumers and users can see, interact with when in a physical fashion retail space. And I've put the Manchester University logo as well, because that is where I did my PhD or doctoral research at the University of Manchester under the School of Engineering. We are a fashion business research group or cluster looking at the applications of different types of technologies. So yeah, just absolutely, Hannah has already given enough background on myself. So I come from the industry before coming back to academia. I worked at Amazon, and then I moved to China, where I worked at the Chinese luxury brand Any Tiger, doing business development for them. And then I came back to Europe and I joined Boggi Milano, which is an Italian menswear brand. And exactly when I was in that phase, so that was 2013 to 2015, I was starting to bring in technologies into retail spaces in the stores and trying to see how management could innovate in their retail spaces. I was more on the marketing department, but of course, marketing, as we know, is an organization that really deals with all the other departments within a company, especially in fashion and creative agencies and industries. So as part of my job, I was starting to bring in technologies like tablets or data analytics, different types of screens to enhance the consumer experience in the stores. And I could see a few issues there, like in terms of how the top management could react to that, or even the people, the employees in the store. And so I decided to use this area, to investigate this area as part of my PhD work at the University of Manchester. And at the same time, as Anna was mentioning, I've been lecturing at a couple of universities. LCF has been my background throughout, but I've had the chance to also go internationally in Europe, in the US, in Asia, in the Middle East, to actually share my research and yeah, and just lecture there for a little while. So yeah, let's just jump straight into the context. I've already given a little bit of background on what's happening in retailing, and absolutely, if you have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat, and Hannah can read them out for me. So it's not just me talking for over half an hour. I mean, I'm Italian, I could talk forever, but it would be nice to see if you have any thoughts or questions. Okay, so as I have already been mentioning in terms of my research context and the questions that I've been dealing with, this is something that really I was starting to spot when I was still in the fashion industry, and I'm still currently consulting and advising for mainly emerging brands because I feel that they have more space for of maneuver for trying to innovate. So as we all know, retailers are always trying to focus on delivering a new, exciting, unique customer experience across all the different touch points between the brand and the consumer. And in particular, retailing is really the place in which the consumer can actually access the brand, have an occasion to interact with the brand. And consumers value experiences more than the simple product, right? Just a mere product experience. So it's very important for retailers to consider these different touch points between the brand and the consumers. Retailers have been changing. This has been, of course, pushed, as we all know, by the recent pandemic. So retailers have been trying to innovate, and the more traditional retail experience, so characterized by the store staff experience, customer service, or the visual merchandising, or the atmospheric elements, the tactile aspects, smell, and so on. Everything has been enhanced more recently, I would say in the last 10, 15 years, by different types of technologies that retailers have been trying to incorporate to enhance this customer experience, either in a functional way, so to allow us to actually connect different touch points between the brand and the consumer. So we're in a store, we can shop online, we can browse product, we can find more information, or also to try and make the experience more exciting, right? So by adding some extra layers, such as augmented reality or virtual reality. So I've been looking at these different types of technologies that myself and my co-authors have been naming with the acronym of CFIT. So CFIT stands for Consumer Facing In-Store Technology. And these are all the different types of technologies and devices that the consumer, the user can deal with, experience, interact when in a physical retail space. So this includes technologies such as QR codes, which are especially used now also when we go to bars to place orders, trying to keep us contactless and more safe and secure. We have interactive screens, digital signage, augmented reality, virtual reality, all the different ways to merge the realities, so the mixed realities. And just a note here to say that, like briefly, the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality for the audience. So augmented reality is classic example in Pocket Go. So we add a layer to the real world. So an extra layers, which is augmented reality, whereas with virtual reality, we're transporting the user into another world. So we talk about VR headsets, like in the video games, where the consumer can really cut off or be cut out from the real world and be transported somewhere else. I've also been looking at more traditional types of technologies, such as Wi-Fi, and also something more complex like analytics, big data, algorithms, and so on. So everything that the consumer can see either more in the back end and then come into the front end in terms of service or experience, and so on. These are the technologies that fall under this CFIT acronym. Right, so this is what I've been looking at, and in particular, fashion retailers are increasingly adopting different types of, technologies in their physical stores as they try to enhance the shopping experience, gain a competitive advantage. Of course, we know that fashion as an industry is more hedonic, but it's also becoming functional and utilitarian, right? Especially post-COVID. So this provides a very interesting empirical context for investigating this phenomenon of technological innovation in fashion retail spaces or retail spaces. So there is a growing body of academic research on consumers as the end user of the technology. So we see a lot of studies. I've also done studies myself on how consumers interact, human-computer interaction with technologies. There is a lot of research also emerging on different types of channels and touch points between the brand and the consumer, online, offline, and the integration of those channels. However, what I've been noticing is that managerial perspectives on the factors, on the insights influencing different types of reasons and factors influencing the adoption of different types of technologies is still lacking. So we have a lot from the consumer perspective or channel integration, but we are really missing like the why, so the reasons and the how, so the processes influencing or driving innovation in fashion retailing. So again, coming from the fashion industry myself, I thought it would be interesting to take this angle, thanks to also my access to those industry participants, and I'll get to my methodology later. So I'm really investigating industry experts' perspective on those technology innovation issues to try and understand how managers are reacting to these different types of technologies and to different and changing trends within the market. Okay, so I've been working around this research question. So what are the reasons for the adoption or barriers to adoption, so non-adoption of consumer-facing in-store technology in fashion retailing, and what are the related processes for implementing those technologies? And within that, of course, I'm also looking at the different types of technologies and also the drivers, the barriers, the implications around technological innovation in fashion retail spaces from a managerial perspective again. Okay, and just to add a bit more of context in terms of the literature review, what has been done so far. This is a figure, like a model drawn from Verhoeven et al. 2015. I'm sure many of you researching in the retail space have come across this work in the Journal of Retailing, especially. So these authors have come up with a conceptual model of customer experience creation. So how do retailers enhance this customer experience within their retail spaces? And what the authors are outlining in here is, I mean, what are the important points for us is that we have a social environment. So everything which is the social elements, the people in the store, the staff, the service, the experience, that of course for fashion brands is absolutely important, or the service provision for people. And then of course we have the service interface. So, and here we also look at the technology. So the technology has been investigated by a few authors, researchers already, as we were mentioning. Also, it's important to look at the consumer co-creation, the customization of the experience, and how technology in combination with the human element can allow for this customization of the experience. And we were mentioning already different types of data, big data analytics that are working in the back end to allow retailers to customize and enhance the experience. Then we have the retail atmosphere, which is a more traditional group of elements. So all the design, all the scents, all the atmospherics in terms of the temperature, the music, the lighting of the store. So the more traditional visual merchandising elements. The pricing, of course, in terms of loyalty programs, promotions, but also what is price calculation for the customers, especially at higher end levels. Then we have all the branding elements and the customer experience T-1, which means anything that the consumer has experienced in either previous retail stores or other experiences the same brands are of course impacting on our customer experience. Then the authors are adding some others like the type of store, the culture, the season, competitors, what is the task orientation, whether I'm as a customer shopping for experience, something more hedonic or something more utilitarian. So these are the moderating factors impacting on my customer experience. So we see in here that this technology has been investigated, but it's become something more important in the last few years. But definitely it's picking up, and it's again accelerated by COVID-19 is something we need to work out because it's an enabler for customer experience. So from there, of course, just to provide you a little bit of what is the theoretical context, so the conceptual foundations, to try and see what other scholars have been investigating in this area. I started by looking at the different types of consumer-facing in-store technologies in retailing literature. And here I've mentioned a few authors, and actually this slide is going to help us more in this direction. So there have been a few studies on CFIT in the literature, maybe indicated with different terms, but definitely research in this area has been growing quite considerably because retailers, as we were mentioning, have been innovating quite substantially. So some authors like Shankar et al. In the first line, they look at consumer-facing or shopper-facing technologies. They provide a definition, they give examples. However, it's a conceptual piece of work. Again, it's not empirical at all. They also look at innovative in-store technologies, again, conceptual. So we see that Rieger et al. In the last line, they define consumer-facing retail technologies as small technologies that allow brick-and-mortar retailers opportunities to introduce amenities of online retailing into physical interactions for consumers. And this is more from the consumer perspective. So there has been definitely research in the area, and it's been growing. And again, different authors have been looking at different types of retail experiences and technologies. And also what I was looking at as part of my literature review are the different drivers and barriers for retailers in their stores, like to adopt technology. And some of those are definitely related to technology characteristics. So whether the technology is something that is in line with what the retailer has already been implementing, whether it's in line with their brand image and positioning, is something that is either representing the driver or a barrier for introducing the technology in retail spaces. What's the purpose of the technology? Very important also, what is the degree of complexity of the technology? So whether the technology is intuitive, or whether there has to be a lot of trainings to be delivered for retail employees to actually perceive the usefulness, the ease of use of the technology and pick it up. So the harder the technology, the higher the level of trainings, but we need to explain the why for the employees. So there has been quite a lot of literature also in that direction. And this highlights different types of drivers, again, or barriers for retailers to innovate. So technology, their characteristics, but for consumers, so consumer behavior, what are the latest trends, depending on the target audience retailers. So whether my target audience is younger, more tech savvy, or a more mature, tech-averse kind of customer is definitely impacting on my decisions as a retailer. And then I've also been looking at the strategic implications of technology adoption in retailing. And there is quite a lot of literature on the different levels of organizational decision making. So whether retailers, well, actually there is a lot of literature on decision making for organizational technology projects, not specifically on retailing and from a managerial perspective. So the literature highlights something more strategic, long-term, as part of the reasons for technology adoption in organizations. So more strategic orientation, or there can be more, let's say, short-term perspectives leading to the adoption of more consumer-facing, short-term technologies in the retail space, or there are more operational reasons that are short-term related, and they have to do with the implementation plans of the technology. So there has been literature in that direction, but not necessarily in fashion retailing. And then I started to investigate, of course, as part of this literature review, what are the processes of implementation. And there is a bunch of literature on the processes of change involved in technology adoption, implementation, and there is quite a lot in the management area, but not that much in the marketing area, like looking at resource integrations or coordination of resources and so on. And usually those processes of implementation, go from the pace of change, the stages of activities, how decisions are made, who are the actors involved. But all that literature tends to be quite conceptual and at very broad levels. So there have been calls for research on what are the processes. So how do retailers go about implementing these different types of technologies, which is of course what I've been trying to test through this study. So looking at this and what the literature has been saying, as well as what are the omissions in the literature. And again, the reasons driving retailers to adopt or not adopt different types of consumer-facing technologies. And also the management of organizational processes of change is something that, as we were mentioning, has been quite omitted in research, in academic research. And also when I started talking with my participants, they were really highlighting the need for having answers to those questions. It was actually quite good to see. Although I'm sure that there is a lot of work to do in terms of innovating the retail space. So that led to my methodology and research design. So what I've been doing in here, I've been looking at the literature again, and most of the studies in this area are more quantitative. So they tend to look at these issues from a more quant perspective. So drawing surveys and trying to test either consumers or top management. However, technology adoption at an organizational level is a very in-depth, complex phenomenon. And therefore, it's important to try and understand these issues, so the why and the how for technology innovation in that spaces from a managerial perspective. So trying to untangle this complex phenomenon from the perspectives of the actors. There's a body of research really advocating the need for qualitative and more interpretive studies to extend this phenomenon of technology adoption in organizations and to gain an understanding of these very complex issues of how people deal with issues of technological change. So starting from that, I decided to take a qualitative approach to data collection and analysis. And here's an overview of what I've done in terms of data collection, participants, and data analysis. I conducted, as you can expect, qualitative interviews, open-ended interviews with retail managers, and not only. So I started by reviewing the literature, and I created an open, flexible interview guide, drawing from the literature. And then I set up to have conversations lasting between 60 to 90 minutes during 2017 and 2018. So this has led to a total of over 66 hours of interview material, which is quite a lot. It took me a while to transcribe everything. And in terms of the participants, I decided not to limit myself to the retail managers, but actually I wanted to look at the wider community and groups. And that's because from my also experience in the industry and from reading the literature, very often fashion retailers are working in their clusters, whereas it's important to also speak to the wider community of practice in terms of who are the consultants or who are the technology providers, who are the people working in those spaces, advising and providing technology to fashion retail clients. So that's why I have these 3 different groups of participants. So I've been talking to 13 technology providers and the selection and 15 consultants. So the selection criteria for those 2 groups were that they were providing strategic advice or that they were outsourcing different types of consumer-facing in-store technology to fashion retail clients. And then for the fashion retailers, I tried to pick different fashion retailers that had a global presence, that had already adopted 1 or more types of CFIT at the time of the interview or before speaking with me, and then operating across a range of market positions, so from luxury to premium luxury to sportswear and high streets for fast fashion retailers. And then within those 14 fashion retailers, I spoke with a total of 46 participants because I didn't want to limit myself to only speak with people in the head office, but I also wanted to speak with people in the store, so store managers, to actually see how they were involved and what were the processes of implementing those changes in the retail space. Also because quite often from my industry experience, head office and retail level, they don't necessarily get along or speak with each other. So I wanted to see the two perspectives. So again, this led me to a total of 46 plus 15 plus 13 participants, so quite a few people. And it took me over a year to do this data collection and analysis. Also in terms of the participants at retail level, I should mention that I've been talking to people in charge of those CFIT adoption decisions. So that ranged from directors of operations to senior retail managers, marketing directors, CIOs, so chief innovation officers, retail technology managers, head of digital transformation, and so on. So the people involved in those spaces. And then in terms of the data analysis, I've conducted thematic analysis. So everything was really inductive in the approach, of course, going back to main themes emerging from the literature, but also trying to see what the data would tell me. So I was beginning with an initial open and free analysis of the transcripts, and then iteratively going back and forth between the data and the literature, of course. And this led to a total of 3 main macro themes. So I came up with CFIT, so the types of technologies that retailers would adopt, the reasons, fears, and barriers, and then the processes of implementation of those technologies. So this is how my findings would look like. Again, I had quite a few mind maps in my study room for a few months as I was going back and forth between the data and the literature. And then eventually I came up with these 3 main clusters or themes and different sub-themes. So the main theme, change or reasons, as we were saying, all the different types of technologies and the processes for implementation. So let me take you through some of the key findings, and hopefully they will make sense to you or happy to discuss further later on. So starting from the types of CFIT, what came out of my analysis, again, I started by looking at different more consumer-facing types of technologies, and actually what my findings were telling me is that CFIT adopted within fashion retail spaces can be classified in 3 main forms. So there were technologies with a very high level of backend system integration. So that's what you can see on the more left side of this table. So the RFID, footfall counting, staff operations and devices. So all RFID technologies, so all those types of technologies that have to do more with staff operations to improve customer service, so everything which is more back-end. And here I have a quote, so retailer number 10, which I can't reveal their identities, of course, but it's a fast fashion British retailer. They were saying to me, we rolled out our RFID for stock availability. That's improved our stock accuracy massively. It's also much more efficient for store staff to run stock counts, particularly for a business like us where we've got a very fast moving stock and loads of items moving around. So that's something more operations based. And then another type of technology is what I classified as a combination between backend and front-end technologies. So this is really when backend technologies is integrated with and added through more consumer-facing tech. So we start by staff operations, and then we become more consumer-facing with different types of technologies. Here it was the case of some of the retailers having adopted RFID in the backend for stock visibility, for numbers, for retail operations. And then this was actually more front end through smart fitting rooms, magic rows, to enhance the customer experience in the store. So connecting back-end and front-end. And then the third kind of cluster within CFIT types as a theme is the more visible consumer-facing technologies, which is the cluster where really retailers try to adopt more of what is on the right hand of the table. So you see VR, AR, magic mirrors, but where there isn't much connection to the back end. So the CFIT is not supported by back-end infrastructures. So this was, let's say, the first theme. And then, of course, I was looking, as mentioned, at the different barriers and drivers for tech adoption. So that's one of the other main themes of my findings. So what the data was saying to me is that various factors, which can be both endogenous and exogenous, can influence CFIT adoption and implementation. So here, these include mainly the senior management, so their characteristics, what are the key people driving those changes, what's their position within the organization, what are their attitudes toward technologies, and then the company characteristics, so the time, the degree of establishment, whether they are new players, whether they're very established with a large market share, which of course makes it harder to innovate. The company culture, the structure, the market positioning, and so on. And then the external environment. So the customer, the competitors, the market trends. So those were under the barriers and drivers. And just to give you some quotes and some examples, again, happy to cover more later in the Q&As if you want to know more. But something that caught my attention, for instance, as you see on the quote, established retailers with more traditional ways of operating are less likely to commit to big changes. This is what was coming out quite consistently. And that's because they have established brand images, so they are less likely to jump on new opportunities. And here a senior informant from a previous retail brand was saying to me, we're nearly 40 years old. Obviously, we're dealing with legacy systems, and that also provides a bit of a challenge because you're dealing with systems that don't all necessarily work together. So again, in terms of those drivers and barriers, degree of establishment, and also characteristics of the organizations of the other systems that they have in place. And then another interesting point I thought was the actors' demographics. So in terms of the characteristics of the top management, where a lot of participants were saying with me that the board of directors of the large established retailers tend to comprise quite old executives who were not born in the digital age. So one of the retailers, a premium or luxury Italian brand, was saying to me, there must be a strong commitment to technology adoption by the stakeholders. So probably all the fashion companies that were founded in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there hasn't been a kind of a renewal of the generations in charge of those companies. So without a renewal, the owners and stakeholders in general are still stuck to old models, which of course acted as a barrier to innovation. And then in terms of, I'm just trying to look for interesting quotes. Of course, we also have the case of more innovative brands, also for the more established ones. In particular, what the participants were saying is that companies that have internal tech-related roles, so those companies that have already started to bring into place CTOs, so Chief Technology Officers, Chief International Innovation Officers, Digital Officers, so all those C-levels that are tech-related, then those will show a lot of commitment of the organization towards the technological change, and therefore they're more likely to buy into it. And then also the data was saying to me that there are a lot of drivers or interlinked triggers to technology adoption. So very often outside players or people that are partially outside of an industry can lead innovation because they have less to lose. And one of the participants is CEO and co-founder of a face scanning company, was saying to me, in fashion retailing, the biggest revolution will come probably from someone that is either a new player or an outside player, so not from established brands, because again, they have a more established brand image and reputation, market share. Okay, and then one of the other key themes that I was mentioning is the reasons for adoption. So this switch between more strategic reasons, so supported by innovative vision, organizational culture for adopting the technology. And this was the case, for instance, of a fast fashion Spanish retailer. And they were saying to me, once technology has been rolled out, it's been rolled out. It's not a choice to have it, but the general mentality in their company is how well you are able to adapt to anything, because that's already the base assumption of all staff. So there's constant change. And again, showing a big embracement in strategic innovation. Mixed reasons for technological change also emerged. So again, leading to back-end, front-end implementation, kind of mid-term solutions. And then tactical reasons more related to a marketing and brand promotion to generate buzz from a more PR marketing perspective also emerged. And that was more related to on-top, not back-end supported types of technologies. And then finally, another core finding was related to the processes of change and implication involved in technology implementation. So this research showed that there are different types and stages of processes. So going from idea conception to technology development, trial of the technology in the stores, training of people, integration, and then follow up with the tech maintenance. So overall, a strong level of technological change it has to be necessary in this case, and is supported by a higher level of technology assimilation versus a shorter term technology adoption reason that can translate into more superficial processes of technology implementation. So just to give a quote in here as well, another sportswear, in this case, British brand, was saying to me, RFID technology, for example, actually would suddenly affect everything that we already currently have. And that's when it includes saying that what's the cost of that, what's the lead time of it, what's the risk of it, what's required to roll it out successfully. So really a lot of implementation implications deriving from retailers. So that's to deal with again, the processes of implementation. Okay. So here's an overview of the examples of the different types of reasons, which is what I was mentioning already. So strategic, mixed, and tactical reasons. So then to lead us to the discussion of the findings and how they relate to the literature. So as we've been mentioning, this study provides a lot of insights in terms of the types of technologies adopted by fashion retailers, so classifying them into different approaches. We've also highlighted different factors acting as drivers or barriers to retail innovation. So those comprehend senior managers characteristics, company characteristics, and external environment in which the organization operates. And then finally, these findings indicate that different CFIT types and the related drivers and barriers can lead to different approaches of retailers' adoption of different types of technologies. So I came up with this classification that you can see here on the slide and different descriptors. So embedded, transformative, and opportunistic approaches of how retailers are dealing with this technological change. So in the first case, embedded, this involves retailers where the technological element is part of the organizational culture and long-term vision and strategy. And in this case, technologies is embedded across all the areas. So from the front end to the back end, it's really embedded and integrated. Then we have a transformative approach. This includes really organizations that are incrementally assimilating different types of technologies as their strategies due to mixed reasons. And this is really part of technology being seen as a key driver for business model formation and transformation. And then finally, the last cluster with the opportunistic classification group or approach involves retailers that are temporarily adopting different types of technologies. So they're showing that they're jumping on those opportunities in a more opportunistic way. So as a way to gain visibility and be perceived as innovators by the stakeholders, so the customers and also mainly the investors, right? So to try and gain visibility in that direction. So coming up from this classification, what the overall study has led to is this framework for retailers' approaches to CFIT. And so here, what we see starting from the left side and bringing everything together is that we have various factors, including the senior management. So as we mentioned, their demographics, their psychographics, so their attitude towards technology, their approach, their roles and where they sit within the organization. And then company characteristics and the external environment, they all act as factors like drivers of barriers, leading to different reasons for technological change. So we mentioned something more strategic in terms of the innovative vision, mindset, and culture of the organization. Some more mixed reasons. So when we have a combination of strategic and tactical motivations. And then finally, tactical reasons, so related to marketing, PR, buzz for brand promotion. So these reasons then lead to different types of technologies, either more back-end or front-end or a combination of the two, that translate into different approaches to technological change. Right, so overall framework, but I also shared in my follow-up or members check, as we call them in academia, with some of the retailers I interviewed, as well as with the tech providers and consultants to see whether this would make sense to them as well. So just to carry on with some of the conclusions, again, we provide a starting point on the adoption of technology in retail settings. Of course, there's a lot of research to do, and I think now it's a very inspiring time due to the constant changes that we're going through. And I can see this phenomenon, I mean, starting over 10 years ago with technological innovation in retail spaces and now being accelerated more and more. This study is also giving practical or practice contributions, so the managerial implications. So we provide a fresh, in-depth, comprehensive perspective on technology adoption in more traditional point of sale formats. And in particular, some of the takeaways for retailers are the different reasons for their technology strategy that should be embraced by top management, and really trying to have everyone on board at different levels of the organization to really buy into this change. So being co-creating the change rather than just being a more bottom-down approach, which usually leads to failure. And then for technology providers and consultants, what I was referring to back with them in my workshops was that they should really, rather than just providing a single piece of technology, they should really try to provide a more holistic coaching service to help retailers really embrace this technological change rather than just a one-off, because this is something that is due to last, and consumers want all this innovation, whether it's something more front-end only or integrated by back-end data and analytics. And then finally, this research has implications for policymakers because retailers are multinational players, especially those that I was talking to. Then there is a need for policies and regulations that lead to openness to new ideas, new technologies, and people talent transfer across nations, really. So we cannot think in silos anymore. And then just some theoretical contributions. I hope this stood out quite clearly, but in terms of the contributions, well, we contribute a framework of retailers' approaches, encompassing all the different drivers, barriers, reasons, type of tech, and approaches. As we were mentioning at the beginning, this is something that has not been fully investigated in the literature. We provide an up-to-date classification of the type of CFIT, and then we provide or we contribute empirical insight on the drivers and barriers. And finally, on the reasons for technological changes, as I was mentioning at the beginning, the literature tends to be more generic or conceptual in those directions, and for the processes as well. And yeah, I believe this is mainly it. I've included quite a lot of references. So for those of you who want to read further, this may be a good starting point. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And although we had chat open, there was no chat, no questions throughout your talk. However, I'm going to encourage those attendees who do have questions, please do put them into the chat. Really very interesting, Francesca. Obviously, we've had conversations about your research, but actually to have a presentation, a formal presentation about your key findings, the approach that you took, and the recommendations is really, really fantastic. So thank you very much. We do have a number of questions coming into the chat, so let's just have a look. So Nina is asking if it's possible to have the PowerPoint. Well, the talk has been recorded and it will be available, not immediately, it takes a couple of weeks to process, but it will be available on the Fashion Business School Voices page. You need to go to the Fashion Business School website, and then in the top right hand corner, there is a link to Voices where you can find previous talks, and you can also find our kind of podcasts that we post. At the moment, we've got a series being produced by Tony Glenville, which is very much about what's happening across the fashion industry. There's a question here, Francesca, from Kieran, and whether or not you have published all of your research, and is it possible to actually read all of your research?
Wow, good luck. I mean, it's, I'm just flipping through the slides. If I stop sharing, sorry, and then I go back to my PowerPoint. Actually, let me go back into the share screen. There we go. So yeah, here I've mentioned, if you see the second and the third one, so Bonetti et al., there are a few of my words there, but because of these massive data sets, I'm still publishing out of it. I mean, I think this could be work for a lifetime, honestly, almost, because it's quite a rich and broad data set. So I'm in the process of drafting out some publications. I have quite a few in my pipeline, but if you go on the University of the Arts website, researchers will be able to see what I've published so far, and more to come.
I think it's really interesting that you chose not to speak to those at head office, that you did actually take the initiative to speak to those on the shop floor. You know, your reasonings being that sometimes there's always not fantastic communication between head office and the app.
Yeah. Well, I included both, right? So both the head office and the store.
Yeah.
To see both perspectives, and sometimes they were not really in alignment. So, and also because they could see me as a neutral, let's say, participant or someone asking them questions, then they would give me more honest and clear answer to my questions.
Yeah.
So especially concerning the issues, the challenges, whether they were involved or not from the shop level, and so on. But yeah. So
did you ask the same questions, but you know, you just got two different perspectives? So did you ask the same questions to the head office staff as you would to the retail staff, or did you tailor make your question?
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Anna. So let's say the research questions more broadly were of course the same. So what I was trying to answer, but the way in which I was forming the conversation areas with them was slightly changing. So different ways to go around those questions. So for instance, to the head office, I would ask what would be the processes of technology implementations. Whereas from the store was like, what's your degree of involvement? Do you get to speak, or are you involved in all those processes, or is it more something coming from the top? So yeah, slightly different angles tailored to the audiences.
Yeah, there's a question here from Kinga actually, asking how did you convince all those participants to take part in the study? Whether or not, you know, you paid for their time, or
No,
it was just
absolutely.
persuasion?
Well, again, because I come from the fashion industry myself, I had quite a few contacts. And in the industry, I was working on business development. So I have this networking skills anyway, I guess. But also through LCF. So some of the alumni here who then ended up working in the fashion industry were a good hook to then getting to the relevant people within those organizations. And then I was attending a lot of events. I was really all about networking, and then snowball sampling. So from one contact to the next. And when I started, I thought, oh, I'll try and have around 5 or 6 retailers. I ended up with 14, and that's because I had to stop. So I reached saturation, but actually I could have included more because there were more people actually willing to speak to me. Provided that everything would stay anonymized, and that in the end I would share the results with them. So again, because it was especially at the time of very forward-thinking projects when I started it in 2015. So they wanted to know the answers from their competitors as well. So it was a win-win solution, and actually with some of them they still invite me back to do consulting and talks. So it's been good.
It'd be really interesting to see how their perceptions and their kind of responses might now be different, given, you know, all that we have been through in the past 18 months, nearly 2 years.
Absolutely. So I haven't followed up yet, to be honest, and also because it would be another 1 year at least of work just on this. But of course, I'm reading how they're performing and reading the news. I'm keeping up also with their reports and trying to see how the firms are performing and whether they have been innovating or not. Some of them actually, unfortunately, have closed down.
I mean, that was going to be one of my questions, whether or not you'd seen a direct link between those that had been proactive at engaging with technology in the retail space and success. I don't know if that's a question you're able to answer, but that was going through my mind as, you know, you were going through your findings.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was, I mean, depending on their strategy, because as the findings are showing, in some cases, retailers would have included technology just to copy everyone else. So that was not the best strategy. Again, there's a number of factors impacting on their success, right? So the speed of adoption, being first ones in the market, whether they included the technology in all the stores or not, whether they have customers buy-in or employees buy-in. But in general, yes, there is a correlation between being innovative in the retail spaces and the percentage of success of those firms.
Yeah. And I suppose also there's quite a lot of innovation in the retail space, but the online retail space as well. Obviously, your focus was on the physical space.
Absolutely. So the focus was on the physical space because I couldn't explore everything. Most of these technologies are also relating to the online space. So it's interesting to see how, for instance, technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, or data are connecting the spaces. And for instance, one of the angles that I'm looking at this for one of my publication projects is how retailers incentivate or give a meaning for the store staff to embrace innovation. So let's say if sales attribution now are changing from being attributed to the physical store to the online store, how are people in the store being motivated to achieve a new target? So there are very new KPIs coming out of this as a consequence that the retail industry has to think about.
Yeah, very interesting. We have one more question from Kieran, actually. Do you classify this research as business to business or business to consumer? I think possibly what Kieran's trying to ask is, are you seeing this research to be used more for businesses or by businesses, or more kind of for consumers?
Well, it's for businesses, right? So it's the angle of the research is definitely, I've spoken to businesses, not to consumers, but the implications are, well, when we do research, it's mostly for businesses. So to give them some managerial implications, so we always talk about the managerial impact of research. Of course, being this marketing, customers are at the center. But as I was mentioning at the beginning, there is so much research, and it's actually easier to access consumers either with qualitative or quantitative research. So I thought, let's take the other angle.
Yeah.
Challenge.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Francesca, thank you very much. Really very interesting. I think you were initially worried you weren't going to fill the hour, but you have filled the hour. So
perfect.
And I know there's lots. That was a summary of your research. So I look forward to hearing more. And thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Take care.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.